The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, in his characteristic manner, is now preparing for a phone conversation with the American president Donald Trump and is essentially making public threats against him. The White House, via Steve Witkoff, claims that Trump's negotiation team has supposedly brought Ukraine and Russia's positions closer together. Only a phone conversation, and especially a personal meeting between Putin and Trump, will bring some kind of result. Putin takes action and starts flexing his muscles, and today he launches a record number of drones over Ukraine. Well, also, according to Ukrainian intelligence, today on the night of May 19th, just a few hours before the phone conversation with Trump, Russia plans to conduct a training and combat launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile from the YARS complex. Apparently to show Trump that he is ready to talk to him from a position of strength. Well, and also, as you know, on the eve, the Kremlin announced that they are absolutely not abandoning their goals in the so-called special military operation. Europeans are now worried that European leaders will talk to Trump before he calls the dictator Putin, and Trump promises that after talking to Putin, he will definitely call Volodymyr Zelensky. And this order of things, of course, is also a bit concerning. My name is Alexei Pecci. Today is the 18th of May on the calendar. Let's discuss this topic together. Before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, be sure to write a comment, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pecci News On. The link is in this video's description. Well, this morning on the 18th of May, Moscow showed how ready it is to go for a ceasefire and how tired Putin is of this war. As Donald Trump stated the day before, Moscow sent 273 drones against Ukraine during a record attack on Sunday morning. This happened 2 days after the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, ignored ceasefire negotiations with the Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky in Istanbul. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, this attack was the largest since the Kremlin launched its full-scale invasion in 2022. And unfortunately, these drones were mainly directed at the Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions, and there are casualties and injured people. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, Russia apparently used many decoy drones, since almost half of the attacking vehicles simply disappeared from the radar. About 88 of them were intercepted. Well, and here, after this attack, of course, it's just the right time to recall the international agenda that is now being promoted by the American President Donald Trump. On Saturday evening before this attack, he stated that on Monday he would call Putin and Zelensky, since he hopes to act as a mediator in ending the war. Although Zelensky attended a meeting in Turkey last week to discuss a ceasefire, Putin didn't even send anyone at the ministerial level. That is, there were just some unclear figures like Medinsky and so on. Europe, meanwhile, is far from discussing peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. The new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated this during his visit to Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in Rome. "A ceasefire is a necessary first step," he said. Here is his quote. "Right now there is no reason to talk about troops. We are far from that. We want the fighting and the killings to stop." That's it. At a meeting in the Albanian capital, Tirana, on Friday, European leaders discussed further threats of sanctions aimed at influencing Russia and the dictator Putin. But if you think that launching drones is the only display of this masculinity from the dictator Putin right before his conversation with Donald Trump, unfortunately that's not the case. Today, the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense announced that Russia is planning a training and combat launch of an RS-24 intercontinental missile during the night of May 19th. Intelligence warned that Russian occupation forces on the night before Monday, May 19th, just a few hours before Trump is scheduled to call the dictator Putin, they are planning to carry out what is called a training and combat launch of an RS-24 intercontinental ballistic missile from the YARS complex. The range of the solid fuel three-stage missile is more than 10,000 kilometers. Its weight is 46.5 tons and its length is almost 22 meters. Intelligence noted that Russia intends to carry out this launch in order to demonstrate pressure and intimidation not only against Ukraine but also against the member countries of the North Atlantic Alliance and the European Union. Like, look, we're crazy, we're reckless, we're ready to fight forever, as Medinsky said, so it would be better for you to just put pressure on Kyiv so that it surrenders. Russia ordered the launch of an RS-24 missile equipped with a training warhead by the 433rd Regiment of the 42nd Division of the 31st Army of the Strategic Missile Forces of the Russian Occupation Army. From a mobile ground-based complex, says GUR. The GUR emphasized that the occupiers plan to launch this missile near the Russian settlement of Svobodny in the Sverdlovsk region. That is, in this way, this is already classic for the Kremlin. Putin is trying to show Trump that this is what he is like. He will be talking to such a dictator who is ready just a few hours before a phone conversation about peace to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile. That is, this is the position. Trump keeps saying, oh, Putin wants peace so much, it's incredible how much he wants it, it just hasn't worked out yet. Right, I wonder how all of Europe is reacting to this. Today, the German Chancellor met in the Vatican with Marco Rubio and Zelensky. And he said that the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, Poland and Germany are planning to call United States President Donald Trump together before he has a phone conversation with Kremlin head Vladimir Putin on Monday. According to Friedrich Merz, he discussed this issue with United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV. The German Chancellor also said that he had a detailed conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And further, I will quote Merz. I spoke with Marco Rubio in particular regarding the phone conversation. Tomorrow we agreed to talk again with the leaders of the 4 countries and the President of the United States as part of the preparations for this conversation with Putin. Let me remind you once again that Trump plans to have a phone conversation with Putin on Monday at 1700 Kiev time. After that, he will call Zelensky and the leaders of the NATO countries. The American president is striving to achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine through such a phone conversation. Well, members of Donald Trump's team have already spoken out in defense of such a phone conversation, saying it is simply absolutely necessary. And here, for example, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated on air that a direct conversation between United States President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin is the only way to break the deadlock in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. So, Rubio stated that Trump wants a personal meeting with Putin as soon as possible. He also suggests that the Russians are striving for this as well. Therefore, all that's left is to decide where and when such a meeting will take place and what exactly will be discussed there. And supposedly, during this phone conversation, these very aspects will be discussed. Well, as I've said many times before, this is a big trap, because during this phone conversation, most likely they will actually be negotiating about a personal meeting. And practice shows that personal meetings between leaders are usually prepared for a very long time, on average about 2 months, in order to develop an agenda to work out some documents. There will be meetings of lower level delegations, including multiple meetings between Marco Rubio and Lavrov or Zvona, and more. Russia will simply stall for time before this meeting, coming up with more and more arguments for why it needs to be postponed, and at the same time the White House will also be delaying. Excuse me for such an expression, sanctions, because today Marco Rubio announced that Congress is already on the verge of voting for these sanctions. But the White House is asking not to rush yet, because give us a chance to negotiate with Putin, as Trump said, to understand what he really wants. You see, right now the country is saying, we want to understand what Putin wants. It's unclear, and only then, supposedly to introduce some sanctions against Russia, that very sanctions package prepared by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Well, today Steve Witkoff, the special representative of Donald Trump, who has flown to see Putin multiple times, stated that the conversation between Trump and Putin will be as successful as possible. And he explains why he thinks so. Steve Witkoff, the United States President's representative responsible for negotiations with Russia, believes that Donald Trump will have a successful phone conversation with Putin on Monday. In an interview, he stated that the call will significantly help determine where we stand and how we will conclude these negotiations. Quote, they know each other, meaning Trump and Putin. The president is determined to do something here. If he can't do it, then no one ever will. And to the question of whether he shares the opinion of United States Vice President Jay Duans regarding the excessive demands of Russians at the negotiations, Witkoff stated that his assessment is that this is, quote, a very complicated conflict that should never have happened. And according to him, in such negotiations, the parties take certain positions. Quote, "The art here lies in narrowing this, wide gap between the parties." And I think that to a certain extent we have done that. What exactly was done, where you judge the positions, is unclear. Here, Steve Witkoff seems to be completely detached from reality. Because let me remind you, in Istanbul during the negotiations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations, it was agreed that now each side, Ukraine and Russia, would work out its own vision and its own scenario for a ceasefire. What does this mean? This means that we are rolling back to the starting position of the negotiations when we get, look, two absolutely contradictory documents. Russia will say, "We are ready for a ceasefire when Ukraine gives us half of its country, completely disarms its army, dissolves it, does not join NATO, and so on and so on." Ukraine will reasonably say, "We are ready for a ceasefire. Unconditionally, I want the killings to stop right now, and then negotiations about everything else." Do these positions align? No. Have they been voiced before? Of course, a million times already, and accordingly, it turns out that we're back at the starting position, beginning to look for some kind of compromise between these two positions again. But Steve Witkoff argues that they have brought both sides closer together, claiming that the other person doesn't understand this fact. We've narrowed this gap as much as possible. As he claims, that's why, unfortunately. But for some reason, it seems to me that now this whole back and forth with the negotiations will drag on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And this will go on for a very long time. And instead of joining Europe and finally hitting really hard with sanctions, cutting off all trade with the Russians, punishing everyone who even tries to trade with Russia, and really harshly punishing Putin for this aggression, Trump gives him a gift. Trump says with his own mouth, "No one but the two of us can resolve this war." For Putin, this is a gift because he finally gets back to the world stage again. Trump suggests meeting Putin, who may propose dividing the world into spheres of influence between the United States and Russia. Well, I don't know what Donald Trump is guided by, but that's his position. And Putin is making threats before the negotiations. Well, what do you think? Did they launch this intercontinental missile just like that? Of course not. Here I put an ellipsis. Share your opinion and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.